This video will explore a Japanese film within Takeshi Fukunaga's Ainu Mosir and the Indigenous film within New Zealand's Waru. The focus will be on shot choices, dialogue presentation, and how the local indigenous populations of each film are presented.
Konnichiwa.
Indigeneity is the main focus of each film, and the way they are presented is different on fundamental levels. But first, it needs to be prefaced that indigenous people of North America, Polynesia, and Japan share many similarities within cinema history. In Marcos Martin's paper, The Fight for Self-Representation, Ainu Imaginary Ethnicity and Assimilation, it references the Lumiere Brothers production company filming the indigenous Japanese population, which they called the Ainu in Yeso, filmed in 1897. In Martin's paper, he points out that these early films are the first cinematographic sequences shot in Japan as part of the aqualites filmed by the French operator François Constant Guérel for a Lumiere Brothers catalog. This shares a direct relationship with indigenous peoples across the planet, including North America. Much like the Sioux Ghost Dance filmed in 1894 by Edison, indigenous people are and were exploited for entertainment and escape. This was in a time where indigenous people, as a whole, weren't viewed as human beings, rather animals to be gawked at. It's a remnant of the human zoo era, where colonial powers asserted their dominance over other human beings. Indigenous people have been fighting for proper representation in film since the beginning of cinema, always striving for agency, visibility, and control, but never given the opportunity to assert those ideals. Within both Waru and Ainu Mosir, these ideas and conceptions may have been similar from birth, but their outcomes are entirely different. In its essence, Ainu Mosir plays like a documentary. The opening shots of the film show how performative the Ainu culture has become, and with its use of the artists on the stage presenting culture to tourists. Although it's a prevalent situation in many indigenous cultures today, Ainu Mosir presents culture in an observational manner. Look at the placement of the camera in this opening shot. You are taking the place of the observer, within the seats, watching the performance, much like a tourist, which then cuts to shots of water, again, from an observational position. The very beginning of the film sets up the viewer as an observer, welcoming you to the village of Akan Anu. Takeshi Fukunaga is taking this approach because it's really the only thing he knows, as he points out himself.
How I came to this film is that I'm born and raised in Hokkaido, Japan. That's a northern island where Ainu people live, but growing up, I didn't have a proper education about about Ainu or their culture or history, and it was only after I moved to US when I was 20 and seeing diverse people and raising their voices and discussing about all different kinds of issues, including the one of Native American, and then being aware about those diverse voices, and then history between of Native American and US made me finally realize that I didn't know anything about Ainu.
Waru, on the other hand, delves deep into Maori culture and its roots with intimate interpersonal relations the community has with each other. For instance, it's somewhat hard to understand what's going on in some scenes where culture is presented, like the funeral scene. This is simply because the filmmakers aren't making this for an international audience. They're making it for themselves and their community. This video explores these contrasting ideas on how indigeneity is presented on screen with the positionality of each film's respective directors. While this comparison seems unfair considering elements, context, and indigeneity, it's an essential comparison in cinema's local and transnational contexts in terms of indigeneity in cinema. We have two films, Waru, created by a supergroup of female Maori directors, and Ainu Mosir, directed by Takeshi Fukunaga of non-Ainu descent. Positionality is a concept in which the creator's identity dictates essential circumstances for the films they produce. While Ainu Mosir's observational approach is prevalent throughout the film, how does Waru differ? Let's jump into the funeral scene in Waru. It isn't explained why this matriarch is collecting the body of the child. Not until later in the ceremony. The audience's hand is not held in this situation whatsoever, and are in fact thrown into the situation through camera placement. Notice how the camera takes us from the position of the outsider to the insider within seconds. That camera flip takes you from the position of a tourist to a part of the community. You are now in the situation, and it is uncomfortable and emotional. The only time you are in the position of the observer is when child abuse is brought up in a heroic sequence.
How long's it been?
Yeah, not long enough, Uncle.
Ooh. Stuck up, bitch.
That ends with us, again, thrown into the community through the power of framing. But how is language used in both these films? Throughout Ainu Mosir, the coming-of-age story follows a boy who is struggling with identity. He doesn't feel Ainu and wants to join Japanese culture. It's through peer pressure from his uncle, his mother, and the community that finally have him join the Ayamati in the end. Throughout the film, the audience is constantly shown the struggle of the Ainu trying to hold on to their culture. How does Waru handle language loss? Through one simple and intricate piece of dialogue.
Ka nui tēnā. Ka nui.
What the fuck did she say? What the fuck did she say?
The one who abuses children and bullies the community is the one who doesn't know their language. This delves into a rabbit hole of indigenous culture loss through institutional implementation. Why is Tapu so evil? Well, he isn't. He was created and can be redeemed, albeit through a lot of work. This type of situation is one that Takashi Fukunaga would never be able to recreate or create. How could he? He isn't a part of the community. In Davinia Thornley's paper, Maori Identity, by way of New Zealand film, or Why I Don't Have to Be a Particular Skin Color to Feel Beige, there is an important excerpt that speaks to indigenous filmmaking as a whole, through Patricia Nagati Peru, a focus group member of the paper, as she speaks about the film Nagati from 1987. Davinia says, the actors are representing people who are part of her community. This was her community situation to solve. The film showed her childhood experiences of Marae dynamics, both good and bad. Where Takashi Fukunaga can say, they are from the Ainu community, Waru's female Maori directors can say, they are my community. There are many moments in Ainu Mosir that are intrinsically indigenous. The moments when the matriarch is asked to digitalize the Ainu language to an outsider. Deciding when and how to bring back important culture, and even struggles with language retention. Ainu Mosir is a beautiful first outing for the Ainu, which I'm hoping will inspire them to take hold of their identity and create their own film industry. As for Takashi Fukunaga, it's admirable that he's done this piece. As long as he doesn't build a career off of indigenous peoples, then this film can remain good intentioned.